Hi, I'm the Auto Tech. Today we're going to be looking at how to convert your 2002 to 2007 Subaru WRX from an EJ205 to an EJ206 JDM motor. Now, the main difference between the EJ205 and the 206 is that the 206 was delivered in Japan in the Legacy or the Liberty body and actually came with 2 turbos. Now, this may seem like a great idea and you may want to just keep the turbo system, but these twin turbo setups are very complicated. There's a lot of moving parts, and even most of the Legacies that had these in Japan were converted to a single turbo setup. If your 02 to 07 WRX has experienced engine damage and you're looking for a cost-effective replacement and you're willing to put in the work, this is a great option that has been used successfully many times. Now, I want to go over some of the things that are the same and some things that are different about these two motors. Here I have the motor stripped down all the way down to its timing belt components. Oil pan is off. The coolant crossover pipe, intake, and all the other accessories are off. On the outside, this seems to be exactly the same motor, but there are a few specific differences that make this one a good choice, but also come with a few specific challenges that will need to be addressed. This is one of them. Right here is an oil supply pipe that was coming from the front of the head here and is meant to supply oil to the turbo that lives on the passenger side or on the left-hand side of the motor. This is where most of the differences occur, being as the American-delivered EJ205s only had a single turbo, and so don't need or have this oil return pipe or this coolant supply bung. On the other side, the oil supply or the oil return right here has a different pipe, and you're going to need to move that over from your donor. The same with your coolant supply on this side. The pipe that goes here is different and will need to be swapped over. Most everything is going to be swapped over from your other engine. The intake manifolds are different. The coolant pipe is different. The power steering pump is different. The alternator, as far as I can tell, is the same, but the AC compressor is also different. This knock sensor has a different connector here, but the same connector here. So I'm going to use this one because it's cleaner and in better condition than my original. There's also going to be brackets that mount up here, and you're going to need to keep the ones off of your old motor to reinstall here to support your intercooler. There's also a difference in the intake manifolds. However, they are interchangeable and swap over directly. You'll just bolt your old intake manifold right onto this head. On the back of the motor here, this oil supply pipe going to the rear turbo is a great option for putting a oil pressure sensor on, as it's remote mounted, not solidly mounted to the motor, so it's not at risk of high vibrations. It also gives you lots of mounting options, and this whole pipe can be reduced to here or even down to here. You can bend it if you like because it's a steel pipe. I took a 1/4-inch compression fitting to a 1/8 by 27 NPT fitting from a local hardware store. It cost me about $4.50 and fits perfectly on this line. And I can tighten down this nut to lock down its position anywhere I want. This hole back here is going to need to be plugged. Otherwise, you're going to have a large oil leak from back here as the oil is returning from the head back to the block. I've taken the oil pan off so that you can see how I'm going to fix that hole. It has a return galley right here that runs down into the oil pan there. I'm going to use this path to wash out any metal pieces that might come off while I'm tapping this hole for the plug. Now, this is a pretty large hole, and you're going to need to find a specific plug to go with it. For the coolant plug, here's the original banjo bolt that I used to size the threads. And I'm just going to use this bolt with a crush washer to plug it in. Now, the hole on the back of the block doesn't have threads all the way in. So I'm going to chase this hole with a tap of the right thread size all the way through, and then I'm going to vacuum out the pieces from the cooling system. I'm also going to add grease on the end of my tap to collect as many of those metal pieces as possible. As you can see, some of the pieces are coming down into the oil pan, which is why I removed the oil pan in the first place. We're going to get all of those out of the sump before we put this back together. Okay, so attempting to tap this hole to an 18 by 1.5 millimeter to put a plug in here failed miserably. I was not able to get the right size drill bit because apparently it doesn't exist. A 9/16 is too small, a 5/8 is too large. So what I'm going to do is oversize this to 11/16, and then I'm going to get a freeze plug and just drive it into here. Still going to clean out all of the metal shavings, but we're going to go and move on to this one. All I've got to do is chase these threads and cut a little bit more at the end. I should be able to collect all those out. And whatever little bit is left in there, I can clean out with a water hose. Now for this hole here, this is the banjo bolt that came out of it. And you need to make sure that you're getting the right sizes. So here you can see it's a 12 by 1.25. Just trust me that that matches. And before we get started, take this and match it up to there so you can see how they match perfectly. I've got a nice amount of grease on my tap, and I'm just going to start it in here. It should start fairly easily. If you come up against tension, stop. Make sure it's the correct size before you continue. And anytime you're cutting fresh threads, you're going to want to move forward a little bit until you feel resistance. And then you're going to want to back up in order to break those shavings away from the mother casting. And you're going to just go forward, go back a little bit, go forward, and just back up a little bit to break them loose. All right, so there I'm going up. There I'm coming up against a little tension, so I'm going to back up and then go forward. Back and forward. Back. And the only reason I'm doing this is because the bolt I have is deeper than the threads that I have, but not so deep that it's going to hit the inside of the head. It's not going to block anything, but I'd rather cut these threads deeper than try to make a perfect end to a bolt and possibly mess it up by shortening it. Okay, I'm all the way through the casting there. You can see how easily it's going in now and how much further I've got past where the end of that bolt is, or the end of the threads are. I'm just chasing them all the way in. Okay, there's tension. I'm going to back all the way out. That grease has captured a lot of those, but I'm still going to have to clean out the hole. Time for the vacuum. I actually will end up taking this windage plate off in order to get at all of the metal that's down in here, and also to make it easier to clean out this hole inside there. I got this one up here tapped out for the right size. So now I'll take my plug, which is just a standard 12 by 1.25 millimeter bolt. Has a nice flat spot there at the edge with a copper crush washer. That's going to go right into there. And then I will torque that down, and that's going to be a completely sealed cooling system. Now, since I did still have some shavings inside of here, a lot more than I'd like, I'm going to just take this regular standard Q-tip and collect some up on the inside here, as much as I can get. Until I don't see any more of those shavings. Just enough to crush that copper crush washer there. And that part's done. Okay, we're back with the EJ206, going over some of the differences between the 205 and the 206. And one major one that I forgot to mention earlier is that this crankshaft sensor tone ring right here is different on the 206 than it is on the 205. You can see here that this has a couple very large teeth that are spaced widely apart. This is off of the EJ205, and as you can see, there are a great many more tone points on this for the crankshaft position sensor to pick up. Now, I don't know if the crankshaft position sensor or the cam sensor is exactly the same or not, so to avoid any confusion, I just swapped these over from my other motor because I know that they work with the old tone ring. So I got the timing belt off, and I've traded over my timing components, which I had recently replaced on my original motor. I wanted to point out the differences between this now that you can see it better. Look all the way around it. See the lack of teeth that we need. Now, this has been sitting on this crank for probably 20 years, so it's going to be a little difficult to move. When you're trying to remove this, go ahead and get yourself some penetrating spray, something to spray in between the sprocket and the snout of the crank. Just give it a little something. Then you're going to want to take a hammer. Doesn't really matter what kind of hammer because you're not swinging it hard. You're just going to just go around it and very gently tap all this. You don't want to deform any of the metal. All you're doing is shocking the crystallization of rust between these two metal parts. And then remember that screwdrivers are not pry tools. You're going to want to very gently get under the lip of the tone ring here and here, and you're just going to turn the screwdrivers sideways. And you want to do it equally on both sides so that you're not forcing it over and canting it and causing it to bind. Now, if you were concerned about it, this would be a great time to replace this front main seal. And I might do that later, but honestly, I'm not concerned about it right now. So, I'm going to take this guy, line up the key with the key, and on it goes. Now, I'm not going to do a whole video on how to set up timing on your EJ. That's been covered many times. It's pretty standard, and since I had gotten a new timing set not recently on my old one, I kept all my pulleys, and I'm just getting one new belt. Now, on here, the Japanese cars usually have very helpful marks on the belt that will show you exactly where the cams are supposed to line up and where the crank is supposed to line up. You'll have to do a little figuring out to know what goes where. Just notice that there's a very long gap here. And a shorter gap here. That'll help you to sort out which way it goes. So here you can see that I've gotten the timing all set up, the timing covers put on. I went ahead and put my original thermostat back into this motor, and I wanted to point out a few other things that do need to be swapped over. This coolant pipe is different. The two are shaped almost exactly the same, though the one from the EJ206 has an extra bump right here. I'm not sure exactly what that's for, but I do know that it doesn't clear the power steering bracket, which lives right there. It's different slightly. Don't know why, but use the parts that you know work. Also, this heater pipe back here is different. I tried taking this one out so I could swap it over. It was very difficult, so I decided, don't bother, leave it. I'll paint this, put it back on, and then I'll have the correct pipe for the heater hoses. Keep in mind, this came out of a right-hand drive Legacy in Japan, so the heater pipes are going to be in different places, which leads me to the next thing. This heater pipe, the one that goes down in between the timing case, is different. It's different at this end here. The other one comes up over this way. Doesn't matter, but you have to swap the heater pipes from the old to the new. I've got the other end of the pipes down here that I'm going to connect up into the pipe ends, which are up there. And the only other important thing to keep in mind is that the oil filter does not have an oil cooler here. Now, it is fairly simple to take this plug out, to put the one from the 205 that has a coolant nipple there and has a little elbow pipe that goes into the oil cooler right there. I've decided I don't particularly care. I'm not going to be racing this car, so I'm actually not going to swap that cooler over. And if I ever decide to in the future, it's simple enough to do. Okay, so tapping this hole to accept an M18 by 1.5 plug did not work. You need a 16.5 millimeter drill bit in order to cut the threads properly. I didn't have that, and I didn't want to buy a drill bit for a single use. So instead, I drilled this hole to an 11/16 size, and then I got a couple of these guys, these freeze plugs, off of eBay. They were $2 a piece. They're 11/16 freeze plugs, and if you can see here, they are flared outwards like that. So the further in you press them, the more they squeeze flat and will want to expand at the edges, and so they're less likely to come out. To take one of these out, you have to twist it to the side and then pull it out this way. So it's going to go in there pretty well. It fit very nicely. It's just a matter of putting it in the hole, getting a socket that fits right inside of here, and tapping it in. So before I did, I got a little bit of JB Quick, and I just ran it around the perimeter, all the way around, kind of gooped it on there, stuck it in there, hammered it in place while it was still wet, of course, and then I just took what was left and I met the seam all the way around the outside of it. I don't really think that's necessary, but I still had the JB weld there, so I just used it, put it on. I expect that to work perfectly. Another side note, when I drilled the hole, I made sure that I had the oil pan off. I don't know if you can see, but this is the pickup right here. But I had the oil pan off so that I can make sure that all of the material from the drilling gets washed out of the motor and isn't still in here to be recycled and eaten by the oil pump. If worse comes to worse, it will catch it in the oil filter, but we want to reduce the amount of metal inside the engine as much as possible. So with that, I do believe we are done with modifying this motor to be ready to go into your previously EJ206 powered Subaru. If you like this, give me a thumbs up, maybe consider subscribing, or not, whatever, do what you like.